Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to this night-ending bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's night-ending bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter is a brief but terrifying one. The date was January 10th, 2017 at around 9 p.m. near Wyoming, Michigan. At my house we have a large window that makes up most of the wall, and my dog often looks out it at night, sitting on a bench that's against the window. That night he seemed particularly interested in something. He started a low barking that he usually only saves for the mailman. I glanced out of the window to see something standing partially behind my neighbor's shed. It was big. At first, I thought it may be a very tall man hunched over. Then it started to move. It was definitely not human. It moved right into the open, where I could get a good look at it. It was hunched over, covered in a light brown tannish fur. It moved in a way that was unnatural for both animal or humans. At the time, I had very little knowledge of cryptozoology, so I searched the description of what I saw on Google, and the results showed Michigan Dogman. I looked into it a bit, researching everything I could. I am certain that's what I saw that day. You know, like I said many times, there's two types of people after seeing a cryptid, whether it be Sasquatch, Dogman, those little creature things that people call the rake. But once they see one, they either become absolutely terrified, or they become so invested that the majority of their time is sucked away by doing the research. And that is me and many of you. One thing that I really can relate with this person, though, is how they described the movement. Because when I hear people talk about how it moved so fluidly and this and that, well, no, the way this person described it is spot on for me. It was unnatural for either human or animal. It was very strange to see. And I guess if they say fluidly, even though it is unnatural, I can see where they'd say it, but for me that doesn't fit. Their balance is, well, what I saw, its balance was amazing for being such a large creature on what appeared to be very small feet / paw like things. And but it was so strange and strange looking, and I never will forget what it looked like. for the rest of my life. It is burnt almost into my eyes and brain. So, alright, moving along. Today's second encounter. A long while back, I went camping at a place here in New Mexico named Oasis State Park. Back then, my church had many kids running around, and I had made good friends with one. I was good enough friends with him to be invited on a camping trip with him, his dad, and his little sister. Of course, I brought everything from a Bible. I don't know why, so don't ask. Spare clothes for a 3-day camping trip, a small pocket knife, a lantern, my sleeping bag, and my own tent, along with basic essentials like socks, toothbrush, toothpaste. It probably doesn't bear any importance, but I was the oldest, being maybe 12. Ryan a few weeks younger than me, and his sister was around 8. I'm now 19 and just barely, so you do the math as to what year this happened in. The first day we set up our tents and proceeded to have a fantastic time. Me and my friend Ryan finished our tents and walked to a pond, not all that far from our tent. The trail to this literally was next to our campsite. I find it important now to mention that yes, there were trees, but not like any forest. These were small, feeble trees, clearly recently planted, obviously barely surviving. I remember them faintly as I didn't really pay too much attention to shrubbery, short of collecting sticks and watching out for cacti when me and Ryan were exploring. Anyway, like I was saying, Ryan and I were having a blast, even if we had to drag his sister around because she was bored and couldn't explore alone. We saw a pretty snake, sleek and black. I don't remember the species at the pond getting a drink. Once it finished, it shot off into the brush. Other than that, only 2 other features of this park are important. The bathroom was up a slight incline along the trail, being maybe 2 or 3 campsites away from ours. That and a bunch of sand dunes built around a rocky pillar, natural pillars like thin mesas, set ahead of our campsite, maybe 3 campsites away. Beyond those pillars was a fenced-off, very flat and very dry area, if I remember correctly. The bathroom from the front of my tent was to the left, the dunes directly ahead through a badly kept trail. The first day was fine, and that night we got a campfire going, had s'mores, told scary stories. The dad told the only scary stories that night, and I'm sure the man's faith affected the gore level of the stories, considering we were kids. It was about some abandoned building with ghosts or something. It wasn't really that scary. I went to bed that night expecting a cold but peaceful sleep. At some point, I woke up and had to pee. I didn't feel like walking all the way to the bathroom, lazy me, right? So I just went ahead and urinated on a small birch tree that sat literally 4 feet away from the tent. After that, I was back asleep in the tent. I don't remember how long I was asleep before waking up to the feeling of needing to poop. It had just rained, I could tell from the tiny leak in the tent, and I wasn't going to poop on a tree. Well, my little LED lantern wasn't very powerful, and now my shoes were outside, the tent completely saturated. But I needed to go, and it wasn't going to wait, so I decided, okay, let's just deal with this. Like literally every tent I have ever owned, and probably every tent ever, my tent had 2 doors. Not a front and back door, but a zipped shut door with a zipped shut screen door outside of that. This way you can see outside of your tent without leaving or having the mosquitoes move in for the night. So of course, having heard coyote howls, I wanted to check outside of the tent before stepping out. And also, being a kid, I didn't realize how easily a wild, hungry coyote could rip through my flimsy nylon screen. So I unzipped the tent door and turned on my LED lantern. For a few seconds, everything seemed clear and the rain had already stopped. Welcome to New Mexico weather. I decided to be safe. I began to unzip the tent screen when I heard a very loud howl, like the coyotes, but much deeper. If you've ever heard coyotes, they can get pretty high-pitched, so this was weird. It took a moment for my ADHD self to stop focusing on the weird pitch and realize that the howl sounded close, like from the pond close. I didn't even really think to turn off my lantern. I just went to close the tent flap. About a third of the way down, zipping the actual tent flap shut, I hear crunching, like when you're on a pebble-filled playground and someone is casually walking. This is because the tent sites had pebble flooring, just a bunch of tiny little pebbles in a big open circle to make a smoother camping area. Not only was the howl odd, but the footsteps themselves were odd. A fair bit of time between each step, and it sounded like they were being dragged with each step, like claws. Well, ADHD me froze in my task, and 1,000 ideas distracted me from closing that tent. Sure enough, I took just long enough for the creature in our sight to find the front of my tent. I instantly froze. For the first time in my life, my mind was truly, honestly blank. Sure, I don't think things through, but I never sit and think about anything. This thing was huge, from what my crappy lantern showed. It was big and a mix of colors on the back, all ranging in random patterns of brown and black fur. It was rather bulky on top, but not like a bodybuilder. More like naturally solid muscle that might have been made from lots of running. Furthermore, it was thin in the middle and had stocky legs and arms. The legs, by the hip, stockier than any other part of its limb. Aside from that, I'd note that its fur was brighter than most Dogman depictions I've read, like the muzzle, which was whitish along the bottom. Now, I've done some research on Dogman since then, and like most descriptions, it had smaller ears and glowing eyes, most likely glowing from my lantern. If you wanted an idea of the base the ears off of, they sat directly on top like a cat trying to hear something. At some point it leaned down and sniffed the tree before turning to me and looking me right in my eye for a moment. But thing is, when it leaned down, its hind legs, I assume, made some stranging popping noise, like your knuckles, but much louder. I looked into those eyes, though, and I swear I've never been more afraid in my life. Have you ever looked at something, just looked it in the eyes, and realized that you are now prey? That primal fear that extends beyond normal fear when you realize that this thing looking back at you has all of the power, that you are its prey, and it has no discernible mercy. I felt that right then, knowing that no tent wall was stopping this beast if it wanted to crush my skull with its jaws. I never did go to the bathroom. I know that some people are going to say that it was just some weirdo with coyote skins or a fake fur coat. It couldn't have been. The fur wasn't very thick, so I could see its muscles ripple as it moved. Plus the fur was flesh with its disjointed body. Stranger yet, before it moved off into the darkness, it lowered to all fours, and when it did this, its knees made more of a popping sound. It was the sound of bone hitting bone awkwardly in your body. I'm sure of it now. Its knees had to disjoint and slide into a different position for it to run on all fours. This is my experience, and some may call it bull, but whatever. My friend and his family heard the howl but ignored it, thinking that it would go away. So I know it was not a dream. Other than that, the next morning I had somehow held my poop all night, and was only willing to come out when everyone was awake. There were tracks on the sand dunes that the ranger said were coyote, but other than that, no sign remained aside from that loud howl that scared any campers that were awake. If you ask me why it did not kill me, I'll say I'm not sure. Maybe it was the Bible. Maybe it didn't care for the taste of children. Maybe it knew the whole campsite would wake up if it tried something. So, for all we know, it let me live just by circumstance. Either way,
That's what I've got. Since then, I've been fascinated in Dogman. Other than that, giving you this story so others can learn enough from me. I'm wanting to learn about Dogman, and if I can help others learn by sharing this experience today, then great. Thank you. Today's third encounter. Myself and my 15-year-old daughter were driving over to a friend of hers' house a little after 8 on a Monday night, and something passed in front of the car. It looked real. My daughter said it was gray. I say it was black, but it was very muscular. It was the size of a large pit bull with broad shoulders. The arm sockets looked human, but the rest of it did not. It had a round head. It used its front paws to run. It would push off the ground with them, and they would go towards its sides, and the back legs would come up, and they would kind of tuck in underneath it. I know how weird it sounds. I wonder if it was a panther. It was still daylight. I thought it looked strange, but I didn't want to alarm my daughter, so I didn't say anything. It went beside an abandoned house on the road that runs perpendicular to the road that my home is on. She said, "Mom, that wasn't a dog." I replied to her that I thought the same thing. I just didn't want to say it. It ran very fast and it looked solid. I have no idea what it could be, but we were talking about skin pedestrians quite a lot Sunday night. I heard that was bad luck, but who knows? I know how crazy this sounds. Today's fourth part of the upload. I live in Montana and my friend keeps seeing a large creature around his property. He's determined to find out what it is, so he asked me to share his experiences. This will be shared in his perspective. His first encounter was on 6/28/21. Our first encounter happened a few days after we moved in. For insight, we moved in on 6/25/21. At this point, I'm still in crutches from a crash, so I'm not doing much of lifting. So while my family were unboxing things and whatnot, I would sit on the porch and read. But today I noticed something while I was reading. I saw it off in the distance, in the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw about 100 feet away from me at the edge of the forest was what appeared to be some kind of large four-legged animal. And so I called my eldest son, Norman, and he came out onto the porch and asked, "What's wrong, Dad? What's up?" I pointed to the animal, and a puzzled look comes across his face. "My Dad, that's the biggest damn wolf I'd ever seen. Should I get the guns?" No. I said, "Let's wait and see if it tries anything." "All right," he said and walked back inside. "Just holler if you need me." I kept my eyes on this as it crept around the tree line. It did that for a while until its head perked up and it ran back into the woods. Later that day I told my wife, but she said it was just a big gray wolf, even though I was adamant that it was not. After that, we would see it in the distance often, and at night we would see its glowing eyes, although usually much closer at night. One night we even saw it peeking through the windows. That night we scared it off with my shotgun. Another night I found out it had gotten into the chicken coop and had taken 3 of them. Norman spent the rest of the day looking for it, and that was yesterday. I have not seen it again today. My second encounter with this thing was July 2nd, 2021. I saw it again. I was driving back home from the store. The road I took is a very small road that had thick woods on both sides. This road is small, so small that if a car were going both ways, sometimes you'd have to pull off slightly to the side to let the other car pass. Lots of greenery surrounds this road, and there are slight dips on either side. No street lights or anything of that matter, so the only illumination is the car's headlights. So I'm driving and chatting with my wife on the phone. She's talking to me, and I'm looking ahead of the road, not really looking at the sides of the road, when all of a sudden I glance slightly to the side and see the creature stepping out onto the road. The creature was about 20 feet ahead and to the left of me. All I saw was a large black shape with glowing eyes staring at me. I was able to see that it had pointed ears. I also noticed that its front legs were much wider and thicker than its back. If you've ever seen the TV show depicting the way vampires move, like super fast, almost glitching across, that's how this thing moved to get in front of me. 1 second, it was on the side of the road. Then 1 quick second later, it's in the middle of the road and beginning to approach my car. When it was 7 feet away, I start to honk my horn. This whole time, which was about 30 seconds, I'd gone silent on the phone, and at this point my wife was yelling, "What's going on?" I whispered to her that the wolf was back, then I hung up. I grabbed my handgun because clearly the horn was not working. The only thing the horn did was stop it in its tracks. It did not scare it off. I'm beginning to open my right window and lean out, pointing the gun at these eyes. I fire. The thing howled in pain and then ran off into the woods. After that, I sped home to tell everyone. Now, the third time I saw this was July 3rd. Last night, at around 10 p.m. or so, I got home from the store. That's something I do almost every night. And my family told me 3 of these creatures tried to attack Norman while he was in the barn. My son, 17-year-old Norman, and 16-year-old Evan, wanted to go find them. I allowed it, but told them to bring the dogs and the guns. This is my son Norman's perspective. Me and Evan headed out with the Winchester rifles and the Dobermans. As we get closer to the tree line, I'd say 50 feet, one of the 3 pairs of glowing eyes started heading towards us, and we were able to see the large form of this wolf-like beast. Evan immediately starts to shoot, and I quickly did as well, but it kept coming. I turned around and grabbed my brother, and we start to run. We get back to the house and saw the creature stepping onto the porch because the porch light was on. I got a clear look. The creature was probably about 11 feet long, standing 4 feet at the shoulders, and its front legs were considerably beefier than the back ones. They kind of looked like someone replaced its front legs with bare arms. The head looked like an average wolf but scaled up, and much, much meaner looking. Its fur was black-gray and white here and there. Its eyes were a bright yellow. I started to tremble as the only thing standing between us and this beast was a thin sheet of glass. As we watched, we saw the other 2 approaching the porch. Out of nowhere, our dad limps over, kind of pushes us aside, pops open the window, and shoots the beast point blank with a shotgun. Back to the dad's perspective. Unlike last time, it did not run, so I slammed the window shut and turned off all the lights. After a little while, the creatures headed back to the forest. "Dad, that things are immune to gosh darn bullets," Norman yells. "I think you may be right," I said. After much discussion between me and my friend, we agreed that it may have been a Dogman or some other canine cryptid. Yes, I think it was the creature that the Shermans saw on Skinwalker Ranch. We don't think it was a skinwalker, though. Today's 5th encounter. Alright, this isn't exactly my experience, but it's my grandparents', and it occurred in the 70s. My grandparents were hanging out with some friends on the other side of town until they decided it was time to leave. It was getting late, and they needed to relieve the babysitter from caring for their kids. Hopping in the car, they set out for home. They live in the countryside, so we're driving down quiet, narrow roads through large fields as they usually did to get home, both silent and tired. As my grandmother, nodding off, staring out the window, she noticed something large and unusual moving in the middle of one of those otherwise empty fields. Curiously, she asked my grandfather to slow down so she could get a better look at it, asking him what he thought it was. My grandfather, a hunter, was also intrigued, since, from what he saw, from his angle, it was about as big as a bear. But it didn't make any sense why a bear would be out in the middle of this empty field. They both stopped, staring at this moving mass in the distance. Suddenly they were stunned as this creature stood up to reveal a figure of abnormally large and muscular man or ape, both very strange, given 1, it was late, 2, the fact that there is no known species of ape in the area, much less in America, and number 3, there were no buildings practically nearby. After a few moments of gawking as this creature stood, now motionless in the distance, they agreed that they should continue home and find the owner of the land and tell them about this possible trespasser in the morning. Slowly, my grandfather began to drive, though he and my grandmother were still unable to look away from this unusual creature. To their surprise, it began to run parallel at the vehicle in the distance. Slowly, my grandfather began to drive, though he and my grandmother were still unable to look away from this unusual creature. To their surprise, it began to run parallel to their vehicle in the distance, revealing that it did indeed run in fashion of a gorilla or large ape. My grandfather then accelerated. The creature kept pace, remaining in line with them. It was reaching a speed of 30 miles an hour. Stunned, they tested the beast, beginning to reverse. Again it followed, also going back the way it came. Now, rather fascinated and amused, they continued to accelerate, reverse, as it, still parallel, in the distance mirrored their actions. This continued for a few moments, before the two once again stopped in the car, laughed, and theorized about this new discovery. It stood still. Their laughter was suddenly cut short as the creature came charging at high speed straight for them, as though intending to do damage. Now frightened, my grandfather sped off, leaving it far behind. That was the only and last time either of them saw this creature. The following morning, my grandfather did as he said he would do and went to the owner of the land to notify him of their sighting. The landowner had no idea what it could possibly be, but thanked him for their heads up, and he said he would keep his eye open for any possible trespassers in the future.
Well, there you have it, folks, this night-ending bonus. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps the channel growing and going, and honestly, what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free. Just simply treat it with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Everyone stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the answers, and God bless.